this ship is going to be 2 weeks late, or the temperature of this container ship isn't right, to change the temperature, and we can send that signal back. So we do it in a little bit of a different way, but a lot of the same applications. So agriculture is a big one, especially with the droughts here recently in California. People want to do a better job of monitoring the moisture in the soil, so you can be really smart about irrigation and kind of flood management, things like that. Another one is logistics, so tracking assets like trucks and ships and railways throughout the entire world. We're actually working with Ford Motor Company here in the US. They're very interested in tracking vehicles that go off the road when they're outside of cell and may have an emergency situation. And at the price point that we're offering this solution, which is again 1/100th alternatives, it becomes affordable to put this solution in every vehicle. So no one should ever go off the side of the road and freeze to death or something crazy like that. They'll always be able to hit the SWORM button, emergency 911, and send people to help. And that same sort of kind of public safety issue is across government jobs, thinking of like fisheries and parks, people that live on reserves and maybe in more remote locations will always have a connectivity solution. We also are going to the domain of global development, so there's a lot of regions that don't have great cell connectivity at all, so being able to put sensors, but also providing basic cell phone, like Wi-Fi connectivity to send messages, not high-speed internet like we're used to here, but just messages about healthcare, finances, weather, very simple messages to family, things like that, which we can enable. And then there's some fun applications as well. So we've kind of come out of stealth mode in the last year or so, and we have a lot of inbound interest. So some of them are pretty funny. There's whale groups that want us to track whales in the ocean, and that's actually something that we can do. We can put an antenna on a whale and enable tracking tuna fish, tracking beehives, kids, dogs, you name it, people want us to track it. And we're trying to miniaturize our devices so that we can support as many of those interesting and useful use cases as we can.
Can you talk about the remote island nations?
Yes, there are also many island nations that are very interested in SWORM, and my CTO tends to have a little bit of an obsession with island nations. Turns out you can buy an island for less than a house in the Bay Area, 500K. So yeah, they're pretty interested because they want to be able to have connectivity where maybe they didn't have connectivity before. We're actually going to the Antarctic in November to deploy a ground station, and we're going to hand out a bunch of our connectivity devices because places like that might have like a ViaSat terminal, which is a traditional large satellite that provides connectivity, but it's a very large dish. And if you leave the region of that dish, you no longer have a connectivity solution. So scientists go, 10 miles far from this dish, they may not be able to phone home. So having a SWORM device that they can do Wi-Fi, text message through, enables them to have connectivity. There's been several other island nations reach out to SWORM asking for internet, and we are in chats with them.
Awesome. And so before we move to party round and then your questions, I'm just going to ask Chris, I mean, you have, again, been really one of the early beacons in this space. So why don't you sum up just some of the reasons you're so excited about this? You've been able to bring some remarkable talent to your stealth space company and also to the industry at large. What are some of the things that you're most excited about, and how would you wrap up the conversation we've had today?
Yeah, I think if you look at the companies on the stage here, you're looking at companies that aren't even 10 years old. 10 years ago, Elon hadn't gotten a rocket successfully off the ground. It took him a couple of times, and now they're raising money at a $30 billion valuation. And it's because there's a really significant economic shift happening here. Economic shifts occur when there are 50x or 100x scale opportunities or disruptive physics opportunities, and all of those things are happening here. If you look at the technology in your smartphone, because LG and Samsung and Apple and Intel are making all these chips, they're making millions of them, they're really cheap. And so it's because those chips are so cheap that we can make these satellites do the things that they do at the cost that we're able to do them. If you look at what Apple does when they make 1 billion iPhones, they turn carriers all across the world charge people $50 or $100 a month for cell phone service. So the reason why space companies are valued the way they are is if you were to take $100 billion a month away from AT&T and Verizon, and you look at, 80% of the world doesn't have cell phone towers covering it. 20% of the world is covered by 100 million cell phone towers that cost hundreds of billions of dollars a year to operate. If Apple were to provide direct connectivity from a phone to the satellite, it would take $1 trillion of revenue away from global telcos. And I doubt global telcos would allow that to happen. Every country would launch a fleet of satellites because national security depends on communications and the security of communications. So I think there's something really big happening here, and it's not difficult for me to see how space will go from a $500 billion industry when the satellites and systems that get data from Antarctica use giant 6-foot dishes and cost $50 a month to get 2 bits of data a day, and $100 to $200 million satellites are being replaced by $100,000 to $200,000 satellites, or I don't even know what those cost, but they look really inexpensive, right? So
More than that.
But I think there's something happening here, and there's at least one company on the stage here that's worth more than $1 billion today, and we'll probably have all of us at some point worth more than that, because these are companies generating revenue and solving real problems at scale, and that doesn't happen very often. So I think there's a real opportunity here that comes along once in an industry or once in a generation. And if this stage were filled with other founders and CEOs doing really incredible things, there'd be more people in an audience solving really interesting problems with small satellites. Thanks for bringing us together.
Of course. Okay, so we're going to do our party round. So, Elon or Bezos? Starting with Mike. Quick answer.
I know, it's Elon, but he needs Bezos' money, that's the...
Bezos.
I think Jeff's a smart guy, yeah. Elon's smart too, but just very practical.
I'll vote for Elon. Okay, so I didn't have you guys on this one, but either interesting new companies that you guys are excited about, or influential new space tech that you guys are excited about.
Planet has done a lot of really interesting things in the optical imaging space, but I think that there are limitations to optical imaging. You can't see through clouds, you can't see at nighttime. So there are companies that are doing radar satellites. There's its own kind of revolution happening in radar satellite technology of getting it smaller and more cost effective. And so Capella is one example that's based here in the Bay Area. There's another one in Finland called IceEye. And so to be able to have another powerful puzzle piece to help us understand the planet that can see through clouds, can see at nighttime, and proliferate radar imagery, I think that's going to be a really great thing for the geospatial ecosystem.
I don't have a great answer, but companies that are doing propulsion systems, I think they're going to take off and be really important.
It's a pun. It's a space pun.
Everything.
Propulsion companies are going to take off. Come on.
I think basically all the consumer technology that's finding its way into the space industry right now. So looking at how you do beamforming in a cell phone, so that the energy that the phone is transmitting is directed at the tower, and the tower's energy is directed back at the phone. It just makes the transmission more efficient. There are new phased array antennas. There's solid state, so if your car's driving down the road and there's a satellite flying over, being able to take all the imagery coming from the cameras or the software update that needs to be installed in the car, and being able to beam that directly and efficiently back up to a satellite, I think is really key. And then also the cameras, like what's happening with the software taking 2 or 3 cameras and achieving super resolution by taking multiple pictures of the same subject and then using software to interpret the images.
I'm going to be with Sara on the space propulsion companies, especially for one example for being able to fly low orbits for a much more extended period of time. That way, the imaging quality can get order of magnitude better, and I think that's very critical because a small CubeSat can only stay maybe a few weeks in orbit without speed propulsion, because you still have some air left at the low altitude, so I think it would be.
Can I add to that? I thought of another one. Optical systems I also think are really exciting. So on the ground, a lot of advancements have happened in optical communications recently, Project Loon and several others. And I think that's going to translate to space pretty soon to provide inter-satellite links that are very efficient, to provide for low latency global communications in future generations of constellations. I'm very excited about that.
Very cool. And I'll actually ask that question. So I'm slightly biased because I've actually invested in the first 3 of these guys' companies, and quite interested in Frog Labs, and they're actually raising around as well. So as far as new companies, I would definitely take a look at Frog Labs for the audience. Okay, so 2 more party round questions. Moon or Mars?
Moon first.
Mars, we already did the moon.
Definitely Moon first.
Yeah, the dark side of the moon, definitely.
Okay, would you go to space?
Yeah, like tomorrow, let's go.
Absolutely. I was a top 32 Canadian astronaut candidate, so almost.
There's a lot going on Earth, so I'm really excited to try that out.
So I tried one to go on the edge with the fighter jet, almost got there, but not quite yet, so I'll do it.
Wait, can you tell more about that story actually? How did you actually get on the fighter jet? And you actually went to the edge?
Yes. Okay. So the idea is like you go in a fighter jet, you try to go as fast as you can, so twice the speed of sound, and then you do a parabola. So basically you shoot very high, and you're just like a rock trying to escape the atmosphere. You don't quite reach the escape velocity, so you don't go into orbit, so that's safe-ish. The other thing is like in the US you can go higher than the speed of sound, so you need to go to Russia to do this kind of stuff.
David, should we kick it to the audience for questions?
Let's give it to the
I
audience.
hate questions.
We've got a mic coming around.
So I don't have to choose, right?
You can choose. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. With the mic to the left.
Great, thanks. We got it turned on. Number two.
Thanks very much. That's a fantastic panel. As we see the barrier of entry decrease and more players in the market, do you actually see either physical interference or communications interference being an issue, and how do you plan to deal with that in the future?
Great question.
Whoever.
Yeah, luckily there's a lot of regulatory stuff in the way, which my company is dealing with a lot. There's a lot of things you need to go through to launch things into space. You need to get approvals to launch, to communicate, to take images, and I think our companies have probably built pretty good moats by having jumped through a lot of those regulatory hurdles and being in a position where we have the approvals or almost the approvals to move forward, and others that would want to do that are probably like 2 to 3 years behind in getting those approvals. And also organizations like the FCC and the FAA in the US and other organizations internationally do care a lot about how many objects are in space, how many objects are being launched, what the effects are in the communities around. So they're hyper aware of the kind of maximum number of allowable objects before we would meet kind of a high risk position. And they're mitigating that with kind of looking at all new entrants very carefully. So I think the regulators are doing a good job of making sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and just to put it into context, hundreds of thousands of airplanes are flying around every day. There are less than 100 rockets launched a year on average in the last 25 years across the entire world. And it's the same kinds of regulatory bodies like the FAA that regulate rocket launches. So we can easily increase the number of launches, putting transponders on rockets, things like that. So I don't think that's a problem at all. And also in terms of satellites, the lower these satellite orbits are, actually the safer it is, because they simply deorbit and burn up. Whereas if you have the satellites in these higher orbits, if a satellite is damaged in a high orbit, that debris field could be there forever or for hundreds or thousands of years and render the orbit completely unusable. So satellites in these 400 or 500 kilometer orbits, when they break up, they literally deorbit within months. And so it's it's a pretty big place. If you register the orbits, there's plenty of space out there for satellites. And it literally cleans up after itself at roughly the rate of Moore's law, making the technology obsolete. And so you're kind of impedance matching Moore's law with the orbital lifetime and actually the radiation lifetime if you don't shield the consumer electronics of that orbit. So physics is really on our side here to bring space down closer to Earth.
One quick comment with regard to an example that's going today. 5G is actually interfering with the way we measure the amount of water in the stratosphere because it's the same frequencies. So people are thinking about that, and things like applied math, as it's getting better, machine learning, I think is going to enable filtering this. So I think that we have all these tools for new competition models that are going to help us make sense of that and get way more efficient with the spectrums and all that stuff.
I have the mic, so I'm going to ask a question. So we have FAA and we have other similar federal agencies in the countries, right? Is there a global body for managing the space? Because all the different, just following up on the previous question, right? So you've got constellations about to go up, right? 7, it's going to grow into hundreds, right? Who's managing that? Is there something in that process?
That's a great question. So on the telecommunications side of things, there is an international group, the ITU, International Telecommunications Union, and they do coordination across the countries. And a lot of the burden is really on like the FCC or the other agencies, but they do a global coordination for the frequencies. I actually don't know on the aerospace or aviation side.
Well, so, I mean, every country has to register their space objects with the UN, but I think on a global level, there isn't a lot of teeth to how can they enforce some of these things. And so right now, there's been a very strong norm towards responsible use of outer space by governments, by private companies, and that's something that as a space community we have to uphold. I think that one of the more unfortunate recent news events, so India did an intentional anti-satellite test where they blew up other satellites in orbit. They did it if you're going to do that, they did it in the most responsible way that they could, which is a very low orbit so that the debris would sweep up within a handful of weeks for a large majority of it. But space has historically been primarily for peaceful purposes, and I think we have to take it amongst ourselves, both as space community actors and also as citizens, to make sure that it stays that way. And I think that there's also been a lot of misperception around Space Force and what that means for the US's involvement in space and militarization of that. I think that space requires more attention from government agencies so that we can better manage all the new actors and split up radio frequency spectrum fairly and manage space traffic. But weaponizing space is a really bad idea because it can screw everybody, basically.
Just one thing, the equivalent of the FAA internationally is the ICAO. So there's also like drilling what the ICAO is doing on that front.
ITO? It's the ITO? So
ICAO.
ICAO, which is the European.
No, it's the International Consortium for Aviation. So
they handle like basically one airplane going from one airport to the other. How do you make sure that the airports are compatible? And other things.
So I want to say one last question for my good friend Tom over here. He is the Deputy Director for MOST, which is Taiwan's research institute.
Yes, my question is regarding LEO satellite internet service. So the first one is, may you share more your prospect regarding LEO satellite internet service? When the LEO satellite internet service will realize in our life, and what kind of challenge the developer will face if LEO satellite internet service will realize in our life?
Not sure I totally understood that.
Did anyone
So
want to
if
clarify?
a LEO satellite doesn't work and it affects human life, or is it?
And as I know, Elon Musk just launched 60 satellites for internet uses, right? So my concern is that when will internet service from satellite realized in our life? This is my first question.
Satellite internet service
Yes.
we realized in our lifetime.
Absolutely.
That's what
And
he's asking.
my second question is that what can challenge the developer like SpaceX will face if LEO satellite internet service will popular for our life?
Can somebody repeat the question for the audience?
Challenges. What challenges would we face?
Yeah, so I mean, I've seen some major challenges with that. So people are used to having having internet direct to their cell phones. It's very, very difficult to do from space. You basically have these 1/r² losses. So the longer the distance, the harder it is to close the link. And we traditionally close the link to cell phone towers or Wi-Fi locally in our homes, which are tens or maybe hundreds of meters. In space, you're hundreds of kilometers away. So it's extremely difficult to do internet direct to cell phones, especially with cell phones that are the form factor that we have today, where the antenna is embedded and it has like a negative 10 dpi gain. So it's a very, very low gain antenna. So it's extremely challenging to close the link to space. I agree, Apple would love to do that. And there's been a lot of companies buzzing about that recently. So I think that's one of the big challenges is that we may be able to do internet to dishes or to small swarm components, but there'll always be an antenna and it'll be very difficult to embed within cell phones. And it will also be difficult to repeat that into buildings. So for example, where we are today, there's not a lot of great line of sight. There might be a window there that might work on VHF, the frequencies we're using, but won't work on KA or KU band. That would mean that you would need repeaters inside buildings to bring that signal down. So I think there's going to be this kind of separation of cell phones and cell towers and Wi-Fi as we understand it today, and then satellite outside of those regions. And I think figuring out what that dual mode solution looks like will be a big challenge for the telcos and the satellite internet companies to resolve.
Yeah, and I will say that there are these very serious players who are building and launching these constellations, but it is worth remembering that this was attempted once before. So in the 90s, there's a big push to launch these constellations of communication satellites, and the bigger names were like Teledesic and Iridium and Orbcomm, and many others that we no longer remember because essentially almost every single one of those either never got off the ground because the project was too complicated or too expensive, or the company ended up going bankrupt because they weren't able to get to a place of getting enough traction market-wise to be able to pay back all the investment that has to happen to build and launch these things. It's a very expensive endeavor. I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars. And so in the 90s, essentially what happened was that cell phones won. The cell towers were the cheaper and more prolific technology, even though space-based systems had some technical advantages over them. And so right now we're going through the second wave, and I think that there have been a lot of lessons learned from the first round in the 90s, but I think that it's not guaranteed that it's going to play out exactly how these companies envision, and like Chris was insinuating, there's a lot of entrenched interests who are operating telecommunication services now who are not going to stand idly by and let newer entrants come in and completely take their lunch. So I think that we will see more and more connectivity around the world, especially in areas that don't have good connectivity now, and it's going to be a mix of low cost, low speed things. Perhaps we'll see a large proliferation of high speed from satellite, but the terrestrial based solutions are going to continue to expand as well.
Yeah, just to put a point on that, what you're seeing here is a very small satellite that's able to transmit and receive from a very small and expensive receiver. You don't need to have 5G connectivity to solve every problem on the ground. And so if you have a cars have lots of power, they typically drive down roads where there's a clear view of the sky. There are big flat surfaces where you can put phased arrays. A cell phone is a tough case for a lot of the reasons that Sara was talking about, but the technology required to make something smart could cost pennies. And so everything's getting smart. Every sensor could eventually, whenever a satellite's overhead, put a payload of data. And I think that's an interesting thing to consider when you think about the opportunity for space.
David, can I give a quick plug?
Go for it.
And so almost all the companies, well, so first there's probably about 30 startups in this space that are pioneering the new space industry, and almost all of them are part of a collective that Chris and I operate called the Space Collective. Some of those companies are raising, so if you're interested in investing in the space, definitely come chat with us about the Space Collective. We can put you in touch with some of those companies that are raising. And then there's some exciting things that we're brainstorming, such as Space Labs, which could be an accelerator for new companies that would benefit from the existing infrastructure of the existing startups. So there's some really cool community-driven aspects that are also happening as far as some of the startups pulling together the resources. So great, well thank you guys so much, and David, thank you.
Big round of applause. Thank you guys so much. This is an amazing panel. I have a bunch of facts for you guys. Here you go. So, yeah, we got one for everyone. Get some quick pictures. So I'm going to announce it here, but I believe that we have the next decacorns on this stage. So not just unicorns, decacorns. Because I think Planet, you guys are not publicly. I think you're away. I think you guys are already on a unicorn already, right? Last round race. So
We're doing well.
they're doing well. So I am announcing today. I believe that on this stage we're going to have potentially 4 decacorns. 4 decacorns. Right? Thank you guys very much. Big round of applause again.